Hey everyone. So I really enjoy every year doing Spooktober videos. I enjoy having a theme for pretty much the month of October. It allows me to focus on a specific genre, obviously, but it also kind of gives me a structure by which I can make my videos throughout that month. So I was thinking it might be fun to continue that pattern throughout the year. So I'm going to start having different themes for each month of the year, starting in November. So this month, the theme is going to be Retrovember. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means retro video games or anything that could vaguely be classified as retro. The thing is it's 2024, and I mean, in all honesty, you could probably make an argument that stuff like the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were retro. But, I'm going to try to have it be more in the spirit of retro and have it be, proper, really older titles. So that's what I'm going to try to do this month. We'll see how well it goes. If I like doing it, I will come up with another theme for December, and if I still like doing it, I'll probably have themes throughout the new year. But this month, we're going to do Retrovember. We're going to do a bunch of retro games, starting with this first video, which is going to be about Puyo Puyo, the entire Puyo Puyo franchise. Puyo Puyo is a franchise that I love really dearly. I have a lot of the games in the Puyo Puyo franchise, and it's just something I'm kind of passionate about. I want to talk about it. So let's get into it. Hey, what am I playing? So what is Puyo Puyo? Well, there's two answers. One simple and one complex. The simple answer is that this is a series of puzzle games that date back to the 1990s. The first game released at the height of the puzzle game fever that existed after the runaway success of Tetris, and was so popular that it spawned a long list of sequels and spin-offs since. Of all the puzzle games that emerged during this era, you could really make the argument that Puyo Puyo was the most popular outside of Tetris itself. The more complex answer is that it's a spin-off series from a dungeon crawler RPG that has largely surpassed the success of its origin material. The RPG series is known in the West as Sorcery Saga, and has mostly only been released in the Japan market. Though there was one game that came out in the West for the PlayStation Vita as well as PC in 2018. Sorcery Saga was originally released on the MSX computer system in 1990, but was ported to a variety of other systems including the Sega Mega Drive. The gameplay you see here is actually a fan translation of that Mega Drive game. I own a physical copy of this fan translation. Characters from Sorcery Saga were brought over into the Puyo Puyo games. In fact, the first few games in the series make very heavy use of these characters in cutscenes and as enemies in the game. The titular Puyo are round slime creatures. In the original game they were elemental based, and while the elemental colors remain in the Puyo Puyo titles, they are now basically just different colors with no real lore explaining why, at least as far as I'm aware. In the puzzle games, these Puyo fall from the top of the screen. When similar colored Puyo touch after they land, they connect together, and when 4 or more of the same color connect, they pop and disappear. Often the games have a versus nature, and you're encouraged to chain together more than one group at once to create simultaneous pops. Yes, that's the official term. That result in dumping trash Puyo on your opponent to frustrate their game. The goal is to survive longer than your opponent, and the loser is one who, generally speaking, has had the most trash Puyos dropped on them without erasing them. Okay, so Sorcery Saga was technically the first game to feature Puyo, but the first actual Puyo Puyo game was called, unsurprisingly, Puyo Puyo. It came out for the MSX computer in Japan and was later ported to the Famicom disk system. It was then re-released in 1991 as a Famicom cartridge, which is what I'm holding in my hand right here. This is the first Puyo Puyo game, and it's pretty interesting. The gameplay for Puyo Puyo for the Famicom is, well, interesting. Much of the mechanics that make the franchise so great are present here, but what's missing is the competitive versus focus that later games would have, and it's a far less enjoyable game as a result. Puyo Puyo is basically a Tetris-like that came out when Tetris was first popular. Multicolor Puyo drop from the top in a single playfield, and you must match them with Puyo of the same color to make them disappear. Occasionally, other types of objects drop, such as large Puyo, that clear out everything underneath them, and carbuncle, little star guys, that change Puyo to the same color. But there's little more to it than that. Absent is the ever-present threat of a competitor getting a big combo and dropping a ton of trash on you, or the joy of completing a combo yourself and dumping trash on them. And ultimately, without the interactions that come from playing the game competitively, it's kind of boring. Yes, you can plug in a second controller to your Famicom and play a form of the versus mode that the series would become known for with another person, but it's not the focus. The focus is this semi-plotting, arcadey style of gameplay where you're just trying to run up your score, and while that can be fun, the longevity and replayability is lacking. I guess what I'm saying is that Puyo Puyo for the Famicom is an interesting game in that it's the first game in the franchise, but beyond that, I can't really recommend it. It's just not that fun. In 1992, Compile and Sega partnered to release an arcade version of Puyo Puyo. This version made the focus on competitive play and established the formula that the series is known for. This version included a story mode where the characters from the original Sorcery Saga made appearances and served as adversaries as you progressed throughout the game. The Puyo Puyo arcade game was ported to a variety of platforms and wound up being a pretty big success. The port of Puyo Puyo to the Sega Mega Drive was actually the first Puyo Puyo game to reach the West, but it wasn't called Puyo Puyo here. Instead, it was rebranded to fit a Sonic the Hedgehog theme and was released as Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. The Sorcery Saga characters were all replaced with villains from the Sonic games, or with new villains intended to be in the Sonic franchise. The between stages cutscenes were altered to fit this Sonic theme, but the core gameplay is identical to what came out in Japan. This game was the first time I was exposed to Puyo Puyo, and though I didn't know that it was part of a franchise of its own, it was something I became a huge fan of. As an aside, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine came out while I was dating the woman who would become my first wife. She and her family loved this game. Her father, in particular, would often sneak down into their basement and play the game for hours. Well, one day I came over and played the game Versus with them, and promptly mopped the floor with them. Listen, I had been playing this game non-stop since it came out, and I had gotten really good at it. I beat her father so badly that he never played the game again, and to this day, some 30 years later, I still feel bad about that. Sorry, Dave. Other than Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, Puyo Puyo also came out in the States on the SNES as Kirby's Avalanche. I don't have this game, which, now that I'm making this video, I realize is something I need to correct. One of the other ports of Puyo Puyo that I own is Puyo Puyo CD for the PC Engine. I picked this up when I took my family to Japan earlier this year. By the way, finding more Puyo Puyo games was one of my goals when I had that trip. I know, I have a problem. Puyo Puyo CD adds CD audio and voice acting to the original game. Other than these additions, it's basically identical to this Mega Drive port. The voice acting in the cutscenes seems pretty over the top and hilarious, but because I don't speak Japanese, I can't tell you if it's as hilarious as it sounds to my Western ears. I can say the actors seem to really ham it up, so it's entertaining for that if nothing else. The colors seem to be much brighter than the Mega Drive or arcade versions, probably due to differences in the available color palettes between the platforms. Personally, I do prefer the look of the game on the Mega Drive over the PC Engine, simply because I find the playfield easier to read with the greater contrast in color brightness. But there's really not much more to say about Puyo Puyo CD. It's a fine port of an excellent game, and it has better quality music and audio, but it's ultimately the same game with no real substantive differences. It's awesome, but if you already have it for another platform, there's really no reason to get this version, unless you're like me and want them all. Puyo Puyo 2 is the sequel to the original arcade game, which is a bit confusing considering that game itself was a follow-up to an earlier Famicom game. It was ported to a variety of platforms, but the physical version that I own is the Mega Drive version. Puyo Puyo 2 introduces one key new feature to the franchise, the ability to counter an opponent's attacks. This introduced a whole new strategy to the game where you can reduce or eliminate large trash drops that previously would have been game over. As a result, the game is more dynamic, but also more challenging. It makes this game an excellent couch multiplayer game. Another change from the first is the way in which you progress through the game. In the first game, you proceeded through a set of opponents linearly. You beat one, and then move on to the next, repeating until you face the final boss. In Puyo Puyo 2, it's more of a roulette, where you have tiers of opponents, but at any given time, you might be facing any of them that are in that one tier. Additionally, The one-note strategies of the computer-controlled opponents in the first game is replaced with more nuanced differences between them, which results in the game being considerably more challenging, as you find you have to change up your strategies more depending upon which character you're up against. Puyo Puyo 2 was ported to an incredibly wide variety of platforms. Here's footage of the Neo Geo Pocket version of the game, which, no joke, has become my go-to game for playing whenever I fly anywhere. Another port of Puyo Puyo 2 was for the Super Famicom in Japan. I bring this up because that port is now included in the SNES games for Nintendo Online on the Switch. So, if you have Nintendo Online and a Switch, you can play it yourself. The third game in the Puyo Puyo series is Puyo Puyo Sun. This is the Sega Saturn port, but it's available for a variety of platforms. It originally came out in Japan, but in 2022 it was included in the Sega Genesis Mini 2. So you can actually play it today in glorious HD if you have that system. Side note, the Game Boy Color and N64 versions are both games I intend to get one day. I tried finding them when I was in Japan, but alas, I couldn't. Let me start by saying Puyo Puyo Sun is a friggin' blast. This game is one of my favorite retro games to play, and now that I have it installed on my Polymega, playing it is about as easy as it can get. Puyo Puyo Sun introduces a more convoluted storyline involving Satan, who actually is the long-running series protagonist, enlarging the sun, hoping to make an island paradise where he can relax while being surrounded by women in bikinis. Yes, that's the actual plot of the game. It's peak 1990s Japanese weirdness, and I'm here for it. The gameplay introduces a new mechanic for dropping additional trash Puyo on your opponent, and it's pretty awesome. I honestly wish it was something they would have continued into the modern games. Graphically, the game features that pixel art Sega Saturn goodness that everyone loves. Sprites are detailed and bright. It really looks great. The story is told through cutscenes and between level interactions with your opponents, just like Puyo Puyo CD. If I had any complaint about Puyo Puyo Sun, is that it probably has the worst load times in the series. When each round lasts only a couple of minutes, having to wait 5 to 10 seconds for the next level to load is a bit annoying. But other than that, this is a flawless classic Puyo Puyo title, and well worth checking out if you're into retro gaming. There were many other Puyo Puyo games over the years, but scant few of them came out west. Most were locked in the Japanese region, which meant we had to import them in order to play them. That all changed in 2014 when Sega released Puyo Puyo Tetris, which is a mashup of the ideas in Puyo Puyo with those in Tetris. It's available for pretty much all modern platforms, but I own it physically for the PlayStation Vita. It also had a sequel that was released in 2020 called Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, which I own physically for the Nintendo Switch. First off, I don't have the ability to properly record PlayStation Vita footage, so we're just going to have to settle for recording off the screen while I play. don't worry, I don't plan on lingering too long on the Vita. Puyo Puyo Tetris takes the competitive nature of Puyo Puyo and sprinkles in a hefty amount of Tetris into the mix. It also ramps the competitive gameplay up to 4 opponents, versus the series classic of 2. The result is a frantic and exhilarating experience. The game introduces a massive amount of modes to play through, too many to really delve into properly here, but a frequent theme among them is having to deal with both a Tetris board and a Puyo Puyo board, and having the game periodically swap between them.
Yes.
Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, which I have for the Nintendo Switch, continues the formula from the first, but adds even more modes and abilities into the mix. This game has become a staple of my Switch travel case, as it's something that I frequently want to play on the go. It has local and online multiplayer. Local multiplayer allows for up to 4 players to compete, and it's utter madness when you have a couch full of friends or family playing together.
Close call. Let's mix it up. Perfect. Swap.
Well, that was my retrospective on the Puyo Puyo games, at least the ones that I own. There's a lot more in the series that I'm not covering here, but that's just because I don't own them. But this was pretty fun to make, and I'm kind of looking forward to the rest of Retrovember. See ya.